Over the last 7 years, Governor Bobby Jindal has helped transform Louisiana. He's championed bills to protect the unborn, women, and victims of human trafficking. He's presided over a remarkable turnaround of public education in his state. And he's also made headlines by cutting Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood. Tonight, we bring you an encore of my interview. We sat down several months ago before he entered into the presidential fray. Here's my interview with Bobby Jindal. Governor, I have to start with your name. Piyush Jindal. Is that the correct pronunciation?
You did very well. Congratulations.
Now, this was the original. Where did the Bobby come from?
You know, the stories are true. I was 4 years old. I went to school. My mom picked me up, and the teacher said, "Your son's got a new name." And she said, "What do you mean he's got a new name?" Apparently, I showed up at school one day and told everybody to start calling me Bobby. I was one of those kids. I grew up watching syndicated TV shows. I'd get home from school, got to watch TV while I ate my little snacks.
Okay.
The Brady Bunch was showing on reruns in the afternoon.
Oh, boy.
There was a character named Bobby Brady, the youngest boy, and so I guess I identified with him more than the other character. You know, he was about my age. He same kind of likes, and he didn't like girls. He didn't like doing his homework. Same kinds of things.
So you were this close to being Greg Jindal?
Well, the funny thing, well, it could have been worse. My mom was worried. You know, is it going to be Greg tomorrow or Peter the next day? Gilligan's Island was on right after, so it could have been a lot worse.
That's right, Gilligan Jindal.
And Bobby stuck. It was one of those things where she asked, "Now, okay, you can't just change your name every day. Is this really what you want?" You got to be careful how you give nicknames. I'll tell you just a quick story. We've got 3 great kids at home. Our youngest now, you know Louisiana. There's a product called Boudreaux's Butt Paste. Oh. Very, very popular.
Not only do I know it, I've used it on my children, but we won't explain now.
No, that's right. This is not a placement. This is not a product placement. So my youngest, we could go through tubes of this stuff, and he knew when it was coming, he'd grab it and run, because he didn't, I mean, it stings, he doesn't like it. And so my wife would run after him saying, "Boudreaux, come back here. Come back with a Boudreaux." And we started calling him Boudreaux. And then we finally said, we better be careful. One day he's going to be in high school, and the girls are going to ask, why are you called Boudreaux? He's really not going to want this story repeated. We purposely try not to call it. It slips out. So in Louisiana, we like to give people nicknames, but you got to be careful, because one day he'll be explaining the story to somebody and saying, "Well, I used to use a lot of this product."
Right. This Boudreaux, we won't go into that. That's funny. Look, you were raised Hindu, which is so surprising to many people, considering you are now regarded and have identified yourself as an evangelical Catholic. Tell me about that journey. In grade school, somebody gave you a Bible with your name embossed on it?
You know, I wish I could tell you this was a quick epiphany. This wasn't like St. Paul. For me, it took 7 years. And it started off with a best friend who kept coming after me and coming after me. He gave me that Bible with my name on it. I wish I could tell you that I was thrilled to get it. I didn't realize what a tremendous gift it was. I threw it in my closet. I'll be honest, I probably would have re-gifted it if it hadn't had my name on it. What are you going to do with a Bible with your name on it? There were a few points along the way I'll highlight, and again, it was a journey of years in the making. There was at one point, we were talking earlier, my grandfather died. It was the first time somebody I was close to had passed away, somebody I loved, and really forced me to think about what happens after this life. Never thought about that. You know, as a child, I never thought about death and whether there's a heaven and how do you get into heaven, and do you buy your way into heaven? Do you earn your way into heaven? And so I started reading that Bible. I started praying. It didn't make a lot of sense to me at first. I met some amazing people along the way. I remember there was a young girl in my high school who had just a passion for life, told me that she wanted to be on the Supreme Court to protect innocent human life, and completely blew me. I had never heard anybody talk like that. And the way I described it, all these people planted seeds of the gospel. I went to my first Mass. I remember being so confused. You know, if nobody explains it to you, I didn't understand the readings, didn't understand the homily, didn't understand the music. Eventually, the 2 things that were critical. One day, I was watching a movie in a church, and it was a depiction of the crucifixion. And I had read theology, I had read the Bible, I'd read all kinds of history texts.
An old black and white film.
Nothing fancy about it. And there was an actor playing Jesus on the cross. And I had prayed on my knees. I told God, "God, tell me if you exist. If you exist, tell me how to worship you. If you answer me those prayers, you'll have blessed me beyond anything I could ask you for." It was almost like I was making a deal with God. It's like, give me this and I'll stop bothering you. And I saw this movie. And when I saw the actor playing Jesus being crucified, for the first time it hit me. It just hit me. That's really the Son of God. And he's dying because of me. I'm talking Bobby Jindal personally, not for billions of people. If it's my sins that put him up there on that cross, How arrogant for me to do anything but get on my knees and worship Him. Started meeting with the youth pastor every day, started reading the Bible again. It meant the words jumped off the page.
You're still in high school or you're in college?
This was my summer after my junior year of high school.
Okay.
I accepted Christ. I couldn't really, because of my parents, I really couldn't start going to church until I went to college. Started going to Mass every day, not just every week, but I was so, you know.
And why Mass? I mean, because early on it was a lot of evangelicals. You later got involved with Campus Crusade for Christ. What was it about Catholicism that drew you? Was it the Mass? Was it the ritual?
I'd love to give you a profound answer to this. Here's a simple, honest truth. A pretty girl made me promise to go to Mass, and so
I was about to say there was an allurement here somewhere along
absolutely.
the way.
So I went to Mass, but once I got there, because you're right, I accepted Christ in a non-denominational setting in a church in Baton Rouge on the LSU campus. College was the first time I really had the freedom to go to church. I used to joke in high school, I was the only kid sneaking out, telling his parents he was going to a party so he could go to church. And so I get to college, start going to Mass every day. I did join a number of these other groups, and there was something so beautiful, even if I didn't understand it at the time. And I read about it, there was something so beautiful about the Mass, about the sacraments, about the tradition. And I'll tell you a key moment. There was a moment where there was a Franciscan priest there, and I used to get to church early, and I was praying silently, and one day he came up to me, I was the first one there, and he asked me to help him set up the altar. And I was so scared. I said, I'm not even Catholic, I can't do that, I'm not allowed up there. And he said, I still remember, he had such a great sense of humor, he said, since Vatican II, it's all okay, don't worry about it.
You can come up and
you come up and help me set this up. And I really gained an appreciation, and then I began to have a craving for the sacraments. But the long story short is, there are a lot of people, and the reason I think it's so important to share this story is there are probably folks out there that'll see this. Maybe you've got a child that's left the faith. Maybe you've got a colleague, a friend, somebody at work, a relative who's never known the faith, and it's easy to get frustrated. It's easy to think, well, this is never going to happen. It took me 7 long years. There were people that gave up on me, people that were frustrated with me. There were people that kept planting those seeds of the gospel, people I never knew who were praying for me. Look, with God, anything is possible. And so my encouragement to viewers is, it made no sense for me to accept Christ, to become Christian, to become Catholic, except for His grace. So whoever that is in your, because we all have folks like that in our lives, whoever that is in your life that may be frustrating or you may be worried about, keep praying, keep planting the seeds. You never know what God's going to do with them.
I want to talk about how much your faith informs your job now. This obligation to care and for the well-being of the people of Louisiana. And there are a lot of national repercussions, I think, to what you're doing. You recently signed some bills requiring physicians to have admitting privileges within 30 miles of an abortion clinic. So if they perform abortions, they have to have those admitting privileges. Your opponents say this is going to close down a good number of the abortion clinics in Louisiana. Why did you do it? Why did you sign that bill?
A couple of things. One, Louisiana has been, now for the last few years, and I'm proud of this, has been consistently ranked the most pro-life state in the country. We nurture a culture of life. Every year that I've been governor, we've worked hard to protect our women, our families, our children, our unborn children, and we continue to do that in a number of ways. This particular bill, to me, is just common sense. This is a bill that says, why wouldn't we require these facilities to follow the same requirements as outpatient surgical facilities? Why would we create an exemption? Why not make sure that if there are complications that the doctors do have admitting privileges at a local hospital, they can take care of their patients. So to me, it was about making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect our women out and our families and our children. But here's an interesting thing the national media doesn't always recognize. This bill was actually, authored by a Democrat, by a female Democratic legislator who actually happens to be head of the Black Caucus in our state House of Representatives, passed with a huge bipartisan majority. One of the things that's true about Louisiana, and we're blessed with this, we've got a strong pro-life culture, and it cuts across party lines, cuts across racial lines, cuts across geographic lines, and that's a good thing, and that should be nurtured and encouraged. This bill passed with huge margins in both chambers.
Some of the critics say, look, complications surrounding abortions, these are rare, it hardly ever happens, and when it does, emergency workers can take care of this. Why do you have to do a special law targeting these physicians?
The reality is there was a special exemption before. If we require the same kinds of requirements in outpatient surgical facilities, why wouldn't we require these from the abortion facilities? And I say to those critics, what are they so worried about? You know, why don't they want to provide? And we've done other laws as well. You know, one of the things we've said is, why not post information at these facilities to help rescue young girls, women who may be there because of human trafficking, who may not be there voluntarily.
Now, this is fascinating. Now, this is something I wanted to get to. You signed a quartet of bills dealing with sexual trafficking, human trafficking. This is an epidemic all around the country. Many people don't even realize it. Certainly in New Orleans and in Baton Rouge, it has become, particularly around big events like the Super Bowl, it's a big deal. Not only did you say, we're going to teach police to train them so they can recognize these victims and really become rescue points, you're requiring abortion clinics to do the same. This is the first law of this kind I could find in the country. Why did you do it, and what do you hope to do with it? Are you hoping it'll be a model?
Absolutely. Well, a couple of facts. You know, unfortunately, this is a horrific crime happening in our backyards. We tend to think of human trafficking as happening overseas in other countries. And what you do is, when you actually study this, you learn that it's happening on interstate corridors, it's happening in states all over the country. These women, these children don't have a voice. We need to be their voices. We need to rescue these victims. It's not a victimless crime. And so you're right, we're training the police, setting up special courts. One of the things we learned as we dug into this from the advocates themselves is that many of these women are forced to go get abortions so they can continue to work for these criminal gangs, these enterprises. It's a very profitable industry, and they're there against their will. So why not intervene at that moment where to let them know there are toll-free numbers, there are shelters, there are places that can rescue them, and we're confiscating the assets of those awful monsters preying upon these women and children and families, taking away their assets, using those assets to fund the recovery services, giving it back to the victims. So it is important. We've got to increase awareness of this awful, awful crime. And you're right, it does happen around Super Bowls and conventions, but it also happens every day in our own backyards.
I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about health care.
Sure.
This was always at the very center of your expertise. If you are regarded as anything nationally, it is as a serious policy person who understands health care. You have put forward a bill, and I want to get a little bit into that, an alternative to Obamacare. Before we talk about that, I want to talk about what's happening in Louisiana. According to some statistics, it is number 48 in the country. Some of the highest breast cancer deaths in the country, obesity, diabetes-related deaths. Why are those numbers so unmoving, even under a governor who for 8 years has presided over this system, but your focus, your specialty is healthcare?
Sure, a couple of things. Thank you for the extra couple of years. We've been governor 6 years.
I get 8 years. To 8.
But a couple of things. You're right. Historically, Louisiana, and you know Louisiana as well as anybody, we enjoy our good food.
And our beignets.
It's not a place known for moderation. Historically, we've always done poorly when it comes to these obesity-caused illnesses, when it comes to diabetes, when it comes to ailments. Now, the good news is we made tremendous improvements. So, for example, 96% of our kids are insured, either through lotship, through private insurance, through Medicaid. Secondly, we've moved hundreds of thousands of folks into coordinated care. They used to be in an outdated, anachronistic system. And for example, we have now thousands of days fewer for babies now spending time in NICUs because now they're going home full term, they're being born full weight. That not only are we saving a tremendous amount of money, over $100 million a year for taxpayers through managed care, we're also having a dramatic improvement in the quality of health outcomes. Third, we took an outdated charity hospital system. When I was elected, 10 of these operated by the state, partnering with the private sector, much more efficient. So in Baton Rouge, the largest Catholic system, Our Lady of the Lake, partners with this. It used to take 10 days to get a prescription. Now you can get it oftentimes less than 10 minutes. It used to be in Lafayette and Lake Charles, for example. Over in Lafayette, if you had cancer, it would take 6 months to see a specialist. Now you can see one almost right away. They've hired specialists. In Lake Charles, if you had a broken bone, you used to get in a car or you used to get an ambulance, or they would transport you several miles away. Now they'll treat you locally. We're seeing tremendous improvements in the delivery of care and the quality of care. I would actually argue Louisiana's experience shows that a government-run system doesn't work. We were the only state in the country to have these 10 state-operated hospitals. It's a legacy of Huey Long. It actually started hundreds of years before. The Catholic system actually started the first one in New Orleans, predated Medicaid, predated Medicare, was at the time very innovative. But to tell people to go to an emergency room today to get their health care makes no sense. So the good news is, whether it's through Bayou Health, whether it's through the public-private partnerships, you see dramatic improvements in the quality of health care and the outcomes our people are getting. Now, applying that nationally. The takeaway for me is we cannot have a government-run healthcare system. It doesn't work. You've seen the experiences in the VA, and my concern is, and by the way, it is awful the administration treating our veterans like that. My concern is we're going to see worse and worse outcomes as Obamacare continues to be implemented. We came up with a 26-page plan, 16 specific ideas. Independent experts say that similar ideas would reduce premiums $5,000 and more. We'd actually restore the provider conscience protections that have historically been part of federal law. We'd allow individuals to own their own health care. We'd help families with pre-existing conditions. In other words,
grants for Medicaid.
Well, global grants, so that there are still, it grows by population and grows with inflation, but there's accountability. Right now, states there's no accountability really in Medicaid.
As time goes on, the predicate of your plan is the repeal and replacement of Obamacare. As time goes on, is that a credible predicate?
Absolutely. I think, as more people have experience with Obamacare, it's becoming less and less popular. I think it's becoming less and less sustainable. All the things they promised. This is the law of the land because they lied about it. Let's be honest. They said, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Turns out not to be true. If you like your insurance plan, you can keep your insurance plan. Turns out not to be true. They said that healthcare premiums would come down. Remember, famously, $2,500 down for a family of four. Turns out not to be true. They also said, by the way, they're going to build in pro-life protections. I think this was sold on lies, on untruths, on distortions. I think the more people experience this, the more you got millions of Americans have their plans canceled, you have premiums going up. I think the more people experience this, the more they are ready for repeal, but you can't beat something with nothing. You can't say, well, we're against this without saying, and this is how we replace it. This is how we provide you with something better. And that's why I think we're falling short in D.C. That's why we offer this plan.
There is a great untold story, and as I spend time in Louisiana, particularly in New Orleans, you see the rebirth of so many of these formerly public schools, now charter schools. Post-Katrina, amazing things have happened. 72% graduation rate in the state, which is leaps and bounds what it was just a few years ago. To what do you attribute that success?
Well, we've done a couple of very important things. We've said, one, we want a great teacher in every classroom. So we changed how we hire and fire and promote and compensate our teachers. It's the cornerstone of making sure our kids get a great education. We all remember the teacher that made a difference in our lives. The second thing we've said is we want the dollars to follow the child. Don't make the child follow the dollars. Every child learns differently. Maybe in parochial schools, home schools, public schools, charter schools. In New Orleans, 90% of our kids are now in charter schools. Used to be over 60% were in failing schools, now it's less than 6%. Used to be only just over half would graduate, now over 3/4, about that, over 70% are graduating. As you said, across the state, record graduation rates, record growth in AP scores, more kids doing better on the ACT. We also started a statewide scholarship program. We said to parents, instead of being trapped in failing schools, we'll let the dollars follow your child. If you want to go to a parochial or another school, we'll let you decide. Every year it's grown by double digits. We're saving taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. 93% of the parents are happy with the system, yet the Department of Justice sued us. Eric Holder took us to federal court, and literally they were trying to trap these kids and these parents in failing schools. Now the good news is we won that debate. We won that fight. At one point, a teacher union official said that parents don't have a clue when it comes to making choices for their children. I can't imagine anything more offensive. We meet with parents every day, and we met with parents that next day, and they said, look, Governor, we make choices for our kids every day. We know the needs of our kids better than the bureaucrats in Baton Rouge or Washington, D.C. Whether it's in a Catholic school in New Orleans East, whether it's in a private school somewhere else in the state, parents know best. Whether it's homeschool, parents know best how to educate their kids.
I've got to talk about Common Core. Sure. A year ago, you were supporting this, Governor Jindal. Now, you've done an about-face. Why? What happened?
Here's the problem with Common Core. It represents a federal takeover of what has historically been a state and local responsibility. In Louisiana, we don't have state textbooks you have to use. We don't have a state curriculum. We allow locals, we believe in empowering locals to make those decisions. You're right. At one point, I like the idea of rigor and standards.
Because it came from the states, and Louisiana was part of these, shaping these standards.
And part of the challenge is the federal government, the Obama administration, has gotten involved in pushing these standards, and the folks pushing it now, they try to tell you, well, we're not telling you, we're not dictating curriculum, we're just dictating the test. Well, here's the problem. And we, in Louisiana, we were on the path to put PARCC in our schools. All of a sudden, schools are being required to teach to the test, develop curriculum around the test, and before you know it, the test is driving not only your standards, it's also driving your curriculum and your textbook decisions. We don't need a one-size-fits-all approach. And you know, there's a reason there's a 10th Amendment to the Constitution. This has never been a federal responsibility. Here's a very important point. I reject the idea. I reject this notion from supporters of Common Core that it's either rigor or no rigor.
Right.
You can have rigor without Common Core. In Louisiana, we've had rigor historically. We've done our own tests, our own standards. I want us to do that again.
Was it a piece of those standards and what they were teaching too, what was being required, was that part of your decision here? I've heard from educators at the college level saying, wait a minute, these kids aren't being exposed to the great books. They're things that simply aren't part of this curriculum. Is that what?
Well, look, there's certainly several steps of the way. You look at some of the reading text the Department of Education was putting out, and I'll just say this as a father, not as governor. My kids were bringing home these math instructions that really, I mean, they're good at math, and they were getting the right answer, but the steps they were making go through just didn't make a lot of sense. You know, every parent probably goes through what they call this new math experience. But my more fundamental problem, apart from the specifics in the math and the reading text, my more fundamental problem was this. This has become a federally pushed approach. This has become a one-size-fits-all approach. It's no longer a bottom-up approach. But this is so important. We have grown our economy. The economy is booming in Louisiana, one of the lowest unemployment rates, record jobs, record income. We are for rigor. We are for training our kids to the best quality so that they can compete with anybody's child in America, in the world. And we've been doing that. By the way, that's not radical. We've been doing that for several years, going back across multiple administrations, Democrat and Republican governors, going back to the 90s. It's worked well with us, and we've done it in a way where we can see how our students are doing versus how other students are doing. This is important. This is going to impact children for years to come, long after I'm done being governor. I'm worried about what are we teaching kids for the next generation.
I want to change gears just in our final moments and talk politics.
Sure.
Eric Cantor, the majority leader in the House, lost his seat. How do you interpret that loss? What's the message there?
Two things. I think there's a big disconnect between Washington, D.C. and the rest of the country. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert about that district, and I haven't looked at the issues of the candidates in that district, but I will say this. Every time you come to D.C., because everybody's making it, the news media loves to make a lot of a big deal about these supposed divisions in the Republican Party. I think the real divide is between America and D.C. When you come to D.C., they tell you can't do anything. They say, well, you can't balance the budget. You can't cut spending. You can't do term limits. You can't reform entitlement programs. We can't grow more than 2% of the economy every year. We can't have a strong foreign policy. We can't stop the decay in our culture. And I think the rest of the country is looking at this and going, $17 trillion of debt. We've got now a new entitlement program when we can't afford the ones we've got. We've got government intruding in our lives. We've got government elites telling us they don't trust us to buy a large soda. They don't trust us to buy our own health insurance. They don't trust us with our Second Amendment rights. They don't trust us with our First Amendment rights. Enough's enough. But we don't just need incremental change. We need a wholesale takeover of D.C. We need folks that are interested in making big changes to our country. I'm an optimist about this great country. I think our best days are ahead of us, not behind us. And so we need somebody who's willing to get up there and say, you know what, America, we're a young country. We can do better than 2% economic growth. Growing government programs isn't the answer. One of the issues, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but one of the things I hope that also is a debate of an issue of central importance is this whole assault on religious liberty. We see it from our government, from the administration. We see it in society. It's not just the Hobby Lobby case. America didn't create religious liberty. Religious liberty created America. We must never forget that. I think it's going to be one of the increasingly important issues, not only in the courts and the legislators, but in modern society today.
Governor Jindal, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.